Okay, welcome back everybody. I think it's time for our next session. And okay, so the three talks this evening, they're all some very experienced tech and LaTeX people. And so rather than introduce them individually, given that it's an online conference, I'll give them a very slight online introduction and then hand over to the appropriate speakers. So first of all, we have Patrick Gundlach, and well, he should be able to unmute himself and introduce and start his video. So yep, he's ready to go.
Hello. Before I start, I want to introduce myself. My name is Patrick Gundlach and I'm the head of Speedata in Berlin, Germany. Today I would like to present my software, the Speedata Publisher, which is used to create product catalogs and other visually demanding documents. It uses LuaTeX invisibly in the background for typesetting. I would like to thank the TUG organizers to give me a slot for this talk. I hope you enjoy it. This is my first pre-recorded talk, and you will notice that. I apologize in advance for the poor quality. This presentation is split into three parts. A more general introduction to database publishing is followed by an overview of my software. The third part was planned to be about LuaTeX, but I have seen that there are other talks about LuaTeX at this conference, so I don't want to repeat things here. The third part is a demonstration of working with the Speedata Publisher. The first part is about database publishing. What is database publishing? Let's take a simple example, a form letter. That is where you have a letter that you want to send out to a lot of people. For that you need addresses, some kind of template, and a word processor or other software to get the output, perhaps a PDF file. The addresses may be stored in an Excel spreadsheet. Many other formats are quite common, so let's just call it data source. The word processor could be, of course, any other suitable tool, such as a reporting software, desktop publishing software like InDesign, or anything else. In more complex scenarios, the template would be some kind of programming language to automate the input, so I'd rather use the generic term such as layout. That is my definition of database publishing. In the recent years, almost any data source comes in the form of XML, so I think this picture now is good enough for this purpose. One key feature in database publishing is the strict separation of layout and data. Database publishing has lots of use cases. You can use it in all documents that have fixed set of layout rules by changing data. The ranges from rather simple product listings and invoices to more demanding documents such as data sheets and product catalogs. The more visually demanding the output is, the more important is the step of optimization. Take this outdoor equipment catalog for example. On the left side, what happens if you add one or more sleeping bags to the catalog? Would you put the item on a new page which would then otherwise be empty? Probably not. You would rearrange the page and scale the images or remove the image with the person in the sleeping bag to avoid an additional page. Optimization needs programming, database publishing needs optimization. A LaTeX approach would be to generate the LaTeX document from another programming language that reads in the data. This sample program creates a LaTeX document with a table and data between the ampersands. I would call this poor man's database publishing, for there are a lot of problems with that approach. Some of these problems are obvious, but some lie in the more general nature of how TeX typesets documents. Some issues that come with this approach. Characters that have special meaning to TeX must be escaped. Every script is unique. For the next project you have to start over again. Positioning things on the page is not fun with TeX. Neither is low-level macro programming. TeX does not have a lot of features that are needed for demanding layout tasks. For example, it does not have good support for master pages, frames with text flow, non-rectangular image shapes, or images spanning multiple pages. Even in cases where TUG is very good, it still has problems. For example, it is hard to avoid overfull lines by all means, unless you set emergency stretch and tolerance to high values, which then can lead to cases where these high values allow rather ugly paragraphs. So it is better to use a specialized tool for database publishing, which can of course be based on TUG. I would like to give a short overview of the existing tools and put them in a diagram where the horizontal axis is the degree of automation from manual to fully automatic, and on the other axis the layout possibilities or layout quality ranging from low to high. I start with word processes with rather low quality layout and many manual tasks. On the other side, there are desktop publishing tools which are used for great layout but also need lots of manual tasks. These can be automated, so I should move them a bit further to the right. One family of tools that can be used in unattended workflow are well known in the XML world. These are so-called XSLFO formatters. This is, by the way, a W3C standard for layout. Other tools such as reporting software or specialized PDF libraries are somewhere in the middle. I would place the TUG family as we know it in the upper right. My experience is that Context is a bit better at layout than the other TUG formats. The tool I present here has very flexible layout output and is fully automated, so I allow myself to place it in the upper right corner. In the second part I present my software called Speedata Publisher. This is the slide from the beginning of the presentation. The Speedata Publisher is the software that gets the data and the layout input to create documents. The output is always PDF, and both the data and the layout input is XML. For the data, that is no problem. You can convert any data source into XML. The XML in the input might sound a bit strange, but I will show you. With a good text editor such as Visual Studio Code, it is fun to write layouts, really. Oh, and I should replace the simple form letters with some real output from the software. Let's take a look at how it works. I now show an example for input of the Speedata Publisher. I start with a simple data file, just one line of XML. The layout is a bit more complex, but shouldn't be too scary. We start in the data file and look for the first element, which is called greeting. Then we go into the layout file and look for an instruction what to do when the greeting element is found. This is the record element in the layout file. All of its child elements are commands that get executed. In this case, it is just a place object which outputs a paragraph of text with static and dynamic contents. The second value tag has the select attribute, which can access the attributes and text in the data source of the current element. This is how you connect the layout and the data file. The output is a simple hello tag in a PDF file. Now I would like to show some details of the Speedata layouts. I start with fonts. Using fonts is done in 3 steps. Step 1 is to connect the file name with an internal name. The next step is to define a font family, give it a name and a font size, and define what font files to use. The third step is to use the previously defined font family. I think this is really easy, and here's the output. You can of course use OpenType features and also define fallback fonts, which are used if a glyph is not found in the current font. That is quite handy for mixing symbol fonts or mixing languages without changing the font. I'm currently working on using the Harfbars library that is shipped with LuaTeX to allow Arabic typesetting and other non-Western scripts. Colors. Similar to fonts, you can define a color by giving it a name and using it later. The colors can be in different color spaces such as CMYK or RGB, or spot colors such as Pantone. Many spot colors are predefined, so you can use them right away. Did you notice the height and the width of the box? What are the units of the width and the height? That leads me to the next topic, the grid. The grid is an invisible part of the layout, but it's very important when you create documents. You can set it to any size you want. In this example, it is used to place the text in a given position. Here the grid is used to typeset a newspaper page. It has a 6-column layout and a small gap between each column. The height is set to the font size. Actually, it is set to the baseline skip or the leading, to get perfectly aligned lines on the page, also known as typesetting on a grid. Another application of the grid is to avoid overlapping objects. For example, when you place an image, it allocates a rectangular area on the grid. To make this visible, I have colored the area, but you can, in a pre-processing step, analyze the shape of the image and change the area it uses on the grid. For example, to float text around the image. The paragraph shape is calculated on the fly. The grid is used to determine if a space on the page is empty or not, so objects do not overlap accidentally. Another nice thing are virtual objects, or here called groups. From TUG we know these as boxes. You can place material in a box and ask questions like, how big is the box, in order to decide what to do with it. The same is done here. The group starts with a size of 0 and grows as you put in objects. It is not placed in the PDF unless told to. When you're done putting things in a group, you can ask the same questions. How wide is the box? Will it fit on the page? Could we extend the virtual area so we have one more item on the page? Or should the page be rearranged? The last topic is about programming. The Speedata layout language comes with a simple yet powerful programming language. It has conditionals, similar to XSLT, and also variables, loops, conditional loops such as while and until, and some more. This is enough to combine the previously mentioned building blocks into an optimization machine. Just place objects into virtual areas, get information about them, and place objects accordingly. I would say that this leads to very flexible layouts. I have not seen any structured document yet that cannot be optimized with these mechanisms. This was the first part on Speedata Publisher. Let's switch to my desktop and see more. For the second part, I want to demonstrate something on the computer. First, I show you where to get the software and how to get started. You go to the homepage of speedata.de with one D in the name. In the middle of the page you find a link to the page, which then brings you to the download page. There you can find binaries for macOS, Windows and Linux, and they come in two flavors: stable that are heavily tested, and of course bug-free, and development versions that contain new features. I always recommend to download the development version. More than 100 test files try to make sure that no visible bugs slip in. The Windows downloads also include installer files, which you can download and run. They are identical to the zip files except that they set the path variable for you, so that you can open the command prompt and start right away. Not shown here are the Debian packages for Linux. You can find installation instructions in the manual. It is as simple as downloading the zip file, extract it, and maybe set a path variable if you want. You can also access the documentation with spdoc once you have the Speedata Publisher installed, and it opens a browser window with a manual which contains some introductory material and a reference part. To get started, go to an empty directory and type in sp_new to get a layout file and a data file. To get the PDF, type in sp on the command line. It defaults to the typesetting task. It is usually faster when you do not have screen recording software running in the background. You might not notice that it runs LuaTeX in the background for the typesetting and the PDF generation. It says output written on publisher.pdf, one page, so let's open it and see what is inside the PDF. When the PDF viewer opens eventually, there it is. Hello world. Now let's fire up the text editor. I use the very nice and open source software Visual Studio Code from Microsoft, which runs on the Linux, Mac and Windows operating system. You can use any other text editor with good XML support. I now have the PDF file to the left, the layout file and the data file we just created with the command sp_new. We can open the terminal to run sp. We see no change since we have the same input. Let's make change to data to TUG. I open the terminal again and run Speedata Publisher again. And there you see Hello TUG. The next changes I will make are in the layout, so I close the window with the data file. First I want to output a bit more than Hello TUG, so I use an internal function sd dummy text and see what happens. I have configured my text editor so I can run the PDF generation with a key press. Now we have some dummy text. I now want to change the page size of the document. The command to do that is page format, also enclosed in angle brackets. When you press the opening angle bracket, you see why I like editing XML in Visual Studio Code. You get context-aware autocompletion and documentation, as well as syntax check. This is because the Speedata Publisher is shipped with an XML schema file which contains this information. The page format should be height, let's say 160 millimeters and width of 100 millimeters. When I accidentally have syntax error, you will see that right away. Now let's run the publisher again. You see the result on the left. I would like to change the text block to some other text command because text block does not allow page breaks in it. The Speedata Publisher comes from catalog production where there are no texts with page breaks. I change it to output, text and paragraph with some static content in it. Let's say hello tag. But I would like to have the static contents changed to some dummy text as before. Let's see what it looks like. I run the Speedata Publisher again. Okay. For the next experiments, I want to change the font. To use a font, you need it somewhere on the hard drive. I copy a font into my local directory. You might remember from the slides that you need to give a font file on the hard drive an internal name. There's the sp list fonts command to help you find out which fonts are currently visible. It has a helper with --XML that gives you a copy and paste command. I copy the command to the layout file, and the second step is to define a font family. Well, I say size 10 point, leading 12 point, and I give it the text name, and text is the default for all the paragraphs and text in the whole layout file. I only define the font for the regular font weight and style. You also can define which font to use with bold, italic and bold italic. Now run the publisher again, and the PDF now appears in the redacted script. The next step is to add a second paragraph to the PDF. I just copy the paragraph command. You see the little gap in there? It's probably easier to see when we set the page size to, let's say, 120 millimeters. Okay, that's much better. You see the gap between the two paragraphs. To find out where it comes from, I turn on the visual tracing on the grid. The normally invisible grid is seen in the PDF file when you run the Speedata Publisher again. The text always starts at the beginning of a grid row, never in the middle. So how to get around this? I would change the grid size. There's a command called setGrid. I always set the height to the leading of the main text font, which here is 12 points, and you can specify a width or say how many columns you want. Let's do 9. Now run SB again. Now the gap disappears because now we have typesetting on a grid where the text always starts at a multiple of the baseline skip. Instead of 2 output commands, you could use 2 paragraphs, for there are never any gaps between paragraphs unless you configure it so, which gives the same result. I want to show what happens when you add more elements to the page, such as boxes. Okay, we place a box, let's say with a height of 4 and 3 grid cells wide and a color, let's say purple. Now let's recreate the PDF. Oh, and you see the box. If you want the text to wrap around the objects that you have placed, just add allocate equals auto to the output command. There's still one problem here. The cursor is right behind the last placed object. In this case, it's the line 3 and column 4, which is probably not what you expect. To get around this, force the text to start in line 1, and the text wraps nicely around the box. The paragraph shape is calculated on the fly. You could add some padding to the box to separate it from the text flow. I set padding right and padding bottom to 2 millimeters. One last thing I want to show you is master pages with text frames. The command is called page type. You have to give it a name, let's say my page, and the test attribute expects an XPath expression that evaluates to true or to false. In the simplest case, just use true. You can also add test for odd or even pages or any other test based on variables. You can define margins. They default to 1 centimeter. That's what we want to use here, so I leave them out. Now I define a positioning area, which can have one or more positioning frames. I just give it a name, and then add a positioning frame. I would like to have a 2-column layout. So the width should be 4 in this example. It should start at the first row and the first column, and the height should be the same as the page. So I use the function number of rows, which determines the number of rows of the page. The height attribute does not expect an XPath expression here, so we must wrap it in curly braces to temporarily go into the XPath mode. I add another text frame starting column 6. Now regenerate the PDF. There are no visible changes because the area is not used yet. I put in the traced command again. And there you see the 2-column layout. You see the red text frame? To use the area, you have to set the attribute on the page object, place object, or output command. Run the Speedata Publisher again, and the text is now on the first frame. Let's add another paragraph. Just copy it from the paragraph before. Run the publisher again. Okay, you see the text flowing into the second frame, just like a page break. The areas do not have to be side by side like in this example. I could of course show more, but my time is limited, so I switch back to the slides. My conclusion of 10 years working on the Speedata Publisher is that tech can be fun if used properly. Thank you for listening. Okay, there are some questions here. And do you hear me here?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay. So there's a comparison of FOP, and I would like to comment on that first. Apache FOP or FO formatters are very static, so you cannot act on the layout you get or on the data you get. So if there's too much text or too wide images, you cannot switch to a different kind of layout easily. It's very hard to get around this, so there's no dynamic layout and no optimization in FOP. Okay, there are other questions in the Q&A. The PDF of catalogs are not published online. There's an example repository with a few ready-to-run data and layout files. They are not production ready, of course, because I cannot share the data, but you will find quite some examples in the examples repository on GitHub.
Patrick, can you repeat the question before you answer them? Because people may not see what you're talking about.
Okay, the first question was about if the PDFs are online and example PDFs are online. And the next question is how I manage to get exact or absolute placements of images if they are anchored to the paragraph or moved. They have two kinds of positioning in the Speedata Publisher. Absolute, where you have exact locations like for a logo with 2 centimeters to the right and 5 centimeters from the top, for example, or relative positioning in terms of grid cells, which is based on a current cursor position, or absolute positioning from the top from the left. So there's no real movement with the paragraph. And the third question from the first person, there's a question about layout problems common in humanities. And I'm not sure if I understand this question correctly. In humanities, I think there are a lot of text running side by side or multiple footnote paragraphs or multiple footnotes. And this is not what I can do with the Speedata Publisher yet. And the text reflow business is easier in InDesign. Could not be difficult, if not impossible in LaTeX. I'm not sure what kind of question, maybe you can expand it. So the next question, the next person, do you think printed books still have a place in LaTeX education? And if so, in what circumstances?
Isn't that an old question?
Oh, that's an old question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So have you seen the Q&A symbol at the bottom of your screen? It's now gone up to 6 questions. Right, if you click on that.
Oh, okay, I got it wrong there, I think.
Yeah, the open questions, not the answered questions. Okay, so there's one there saying...
Just give me a second.
Yeah,
okay.
I can read them out to you if you like.
No, okay. The question now is there support for math? There's actually no support for math, I have to admit. Nobody asked for it yet. So if there's some sponsor, I would be happy to implement it. It's not hard because it's running LuaTeX in the background, but I need to have some kind of interface from MathML to no, it's not just asking, you have to sponsor it. So I just need a connection from MathML to LuaTeX, which is quite a task, and I cannot do it right now. Output, could you use Speedata to produce XML or HTML? No, it's just used to get PDF. Question on automatic placement. Just let me skip over the question. I think this is a very long question, and maybe I should deal with it later. Okay, the overview of available tools. I missed actually FrameMaker, of course. This is an industry standard tool for structured data publishing, but it's what I have seen not really very different from other products from Adobe, like InDesign. There's a different audience, of course, but I would place this in the upper left corner as well. The code for image shape recognition, which I've shown, it's separate from the Speedata Publisher. You can download it from Git as well, from GitHub as well. So there are quite some more questions. Okay, Paul asked how to deal with rivers. There's no support for river detection or to avoid rivers in TextFlow, where we have gaps on text lines which lead to ugly shapes or to ugly visual output. Okay, there's a question, I think, which is the relation to TEG and to Speedata. You cannot use any TEG files. It reads the both XML files and creates the output with LuaTeX, but does not generate any intermediate TEG files. So I cannot use any styles from LaTeX or output some results to manipulate it later on. What's the benefit of having layout specified in XML? It's great because you're already in the XML world. You have tools to transform any kind of data to XML or to a layout file. And when you have a good XML editor, it's really fun to edit XML. So I prefer it actually to other programming languages where I don't have a good feedback from the IDE of possible command completion or syntax check. Oh, and slightly off topic, are you still working on your proposed book on LuaTeX? Actually, no, I have abandoned this years ago. So I hope I have answered the questions. Okay, Jano, ask a question. Yeah, about font feature, OpenType font features. Yes, they are supported, but not all of them yet. I'm currently switching to Harfbus, and I would like to allow all the OpenType font features that Harfbus allows. So then the answer will be yes. Currently, it's, well, most of them are supported.
What is the price of this?
It's free. It's an open source software.
I see. Thank you.
Just download it, use it, and of course, I earn my money. I have to earn my money somehow, and I earn it with services. If somebody has questions that are not simple questions, then I charge money for answering or helping or creating layouts. Yeah, beer would be great too. So if you download it and try it out, just send me any questions you have. I try to answer them all. Just write an email or send a bug report on GitHub, even if it's not a bug. If it's just a question, that's okay. Just get in contact and don't hesitate.
Okay, well, if there aren't any more questions, let's all thank Patrick in whatever way we can, knock on your desks or whatever, and if the next speaker is almost ready, we can move on. But thank you for a very, very nice talk.
Thank you.